Okay, so setting the scene, part one. I feel but the importance of this is we're going to have to run a few sessions on this because when I was putting it together, it became too large for one presentation. But setting the scene, really have in your mind how important the setup is. You get the setup right, most other things will occur really smoothly. So in today's agenda, we're going to go setting the scene in a conversation, Q&A, then we will have some exercises, time bearing. Okay, I think the first thing we need to do always, and we do this, is acknowledge ourselves. We are probably living in the most intense times and tough times in history. They are also the most interesting times. Okay, so we really are at the spear end. So let's take a moment to acknowledge that. Okay, what we're facing is unfair. And what I mean by this is if we're two people in a conversation, both of us think we're correct in our thinking. The other person thinks they're correct. We think we're correct. But we want to go to a slightly higher state to start to ask, why is the conversation not going well? And then adjust. So that's why it's unfair. We're going to start addressing emotions, looking at ourselves, explaining things differently, you know, having a real growth spurt. So remember, our goal is to reach people. This requires work, practice, and acquiring skills. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be fair. But when we do start really reaching people, we're going to see a very positive shift, and we're also going to see a lot of apologies. Okay, don't sort of expect them, but you'll start to see them. But you can't tell someone they're wrong. But when they see that they're wrong, they will, and if you allow them the space, they will move into it, has been my experience. Right, now, a little bit of profanity, but this is really key, okay? When my lower self steps out of line and my higher self comes to reaffirm my mission, you cannot uplift humanity and call them idiots at the same time. Okay. I know, you know, that we do this, and of course, you know, in jest at time to release some tension, it's fine. Okay. But how we see things is going to really dictate it. So the anger, the hopelessness, all the other emotions are justified and understandable. I'm not saying they're not. What I am saying is, that we acknowledge and we look to resolve. Otherwise, success is going to be limited. It really will be. I know it's just one of those things. If, you know, go and shout at someone some facts and see how that works, it just doesn't work. So it's one of the things we have to acknowledge. And this really is that kind of higher state of consciousness. So some notes on the presentation. So, you know, we've got limited resources and time. So really it's substance over style. So you're not going to see many sort of flashy videos. I mean, the project is really starting to take off now, so we've got added workload, but really focus on getting this course finished so it can be up and accessible to all. And today we're going to look at setting the scene, which in my opinion is the most important thing. If you get that right, then it tends to work really well. The setup of everything, the foundations are key. Without solid foundations, we have a house of cards. This information is powerful, but it's currently in the wrong hands, and that's people that exploit rather than enrich. Okay, so we really want to, you know, and there's no, when I've looked at this so many years, I thought, well, what's the remedy? The remedy really is to give everyone the information. You know, it's really to level the playing field for people to know how they're being manipulated to protect themselves. And a quick point is, if we go and buy the apple juice analogy, you go and buy a bottle of apple juice at the supermarket, cloudy one. When you're learning, it's a bit like shaking the apple juice. Everything's going to seem a bit confusing, a bit cloudy, a bit foggy. But as you relax and you absorb, it calms down, it becomes, you know, it settles, and then things become clearer. And it's been my experience, you're just going to keep going through this and just get used to it, really. Confused, clear, confused, clear, confused, clear. That's what tends to happen. So a couple of videos, and this really is for the people watching the replay, is a few videos to watch before this one would be the dynamics presentation and the perception presentation. Since this has been recorded, you can obviously rewatch this after those. What happened before often dictates what happens after. Okay. So here's a really fascinating study. There was an online furniture store, okay, and they were trialing, you know, understand a lot of this information, and they created two front pages. They created one with fluffy clouds in the background, and they created one with pennies in the background. As it turned out, the ones that had the fluffy clouds, they bought soft furniture. The ones that had the pennies, they bought economical furniture. This effectively is the setup. It's the initial, it's the first impressions. The first impression of something guides our mood and our emotion. That makes sense. And they've shown this time and time again. And it's literally known as anchoring bias. Initial impressions really have a powerful effect. Okay, much more than actually they should. But of course, there's something that goes on prior to the first impression. Okay. And that is, am I recording, by the way? Sorry, just let me check it.
Yes, you are.
I am. Okay, I'll just edit that out. Okay, so the person that we speak with, the first impression in our mind, how do we see that person? How are we holding a picture of them? Is it a smiling picture or is it an angry picture? How has our day been that day? This is really key, okay? Because this all feeds into our mindset, okay? And our beliefs and our knowledge also feed into our mindset. And this will really dictate our posture, our tone of voice, our facial expression, etc. So if we end up, our mind state makes us like this, what we're going to do, we're going to do two things. Our logical mind is going to shut down. We're going to be quite emotional. We won't be able to remember. If I had £1 for every time someone said to me, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, I got angry and I couldn't remember a single thing. That's not personal to you. That's how the brain functions. Because what it's doing is it's triggering the fight or flight, and you're just trying to get out of there. And that's why fight or flight. That's why you'll see someone want to fight you, metaphorically, or they want to run, or they want to freeze. That's what happens. Okay. Alternatively, if we end up being a very calm, rational mindset, then we get access to all the resources of our mind. Now, you know, this pre-verbal, when we see people, and I told the story of when I walk my dog now, I found that, you know, a couple of years ago, I'd walk the dog, and then if we see another owner with another dog, what happens is the dogs have to work out an orientation. Is this person friendly or not? What I found was if I smiled at the owner, genuinely just smiled at the owner, none of that happened. They relaxed, the dog relaxed, I relaxed, my dog relaxed, and then they just go up and sniff each other, and then we say hello and we walk off. That first impression, really, that we're always scanning, is this person friendly or not? And that tends to happen like contextually as well. So the reason I mention this is because so often we want to know, what is it I need to say? You know, what are the facts? What are the science? But we know there's 3 levels. The first level is our mindset. That's going to dictate everything. It's going to be the biggest thing. The second thing is how I say things, which words I use, the structures, the psychology. Only then is the content really, really key. Okay. So what I've noticed is the biggest successes, because unresolved emotion distorts our perception. And this is why so much fear is propagated, because people won't see things clearly if there's lots of strong emotions. Okay, so that's why us dealing with our emotions will be so powerful. So first impression is more important than we realize. Okay, so the pre-verbal is like, if this guy is coming up to you, how are you going to feel about talking to this guy? Okay, it's going to be, you know, straight away, I mean, viscerally we feel it, as opposed to this guy. I mean, there's going to be a very different. So the thing is to, you know, we're not smiling enough for a start, but there's lots of reasons not to smile. But if we can find our humanity, we can find our care and our kindness, all those things in this stressful situation, it will be so powerful. Okay. So the opening lines will dictate the path of the conversation, very much like the fluffy clouds or the pennies. And if we look at some examples, so here's 3 different paths of a conversation, and you'll see when you see this clearly just how it will dictate the answer. So if I said, what don't you like about XXX? Okay, it could be a person, a place, or a thing. Where have I directed their attention? Okay, to whatever they don't like about something. And then the response is more often than not going to be the things they don't like about XXX. If I said, what do you think of XXX? That's kind of neutral. What do you like about XXX? It's going to be focusing on the positive. So what I've noticed in actually asking someone how they are in the middle of this pandemic is probably not the best question to ask someone, okay? Because we're orientated at so much negative stuff at the moment that it's, find something pleasant to talk about, and then you can have a really nice connection. Because, what happens is we get led down these paths, and obviously a lot of the population have been led down the garden path, haven't they? So questions direct focus, really our attention, our consciousness. And if you look at how much attention and focus has been focused on a particular illness, that illness overshadows all other illnesses at the moment, doesn't it? Okay. Whereas there'd be ones that are much more dangerous, but people don't think about them. Yeah. This is what happens with our focus. We almost become hypnotized onto a certain thought. So yeah, first impressions are more important than we realize. So here's another example of a couple of conversational paths, which will really start to show you how much propaganda ends up in the media. Controversial podcaster test positive for COVID. Think about the assumptions in this. What is the picture that is being played in our mind? Controversial, we think, oh, this person's a little bit edgy. Podcaster, that's a way to remove authority, etc. Then it's uses fringe treatment horse dewormer. Okay, you see how loaded the path of this statement is. So of course the average person is going to go, whoa, what an idiot. That makes sense. And they won't actually be aware of how they've been taken down that path. An alternative path could be mega successful interviewer test positive for COVID. Think about the contrast in the picture that's now in our mind. Enlists expertise and treats with long proven safe drugs successfully, which actually what happened. They didn't mention that he recovered very quickly, did they? They missed that part out of the story. So that's a very different response. Can we see how, being very aware that everything we say is going to take people down a specific path? And think about the paths that they've been taken down for so long with so much emotion. So here's some example conversations, really. And when we look at what are the elements within conversation. So as we speak, the listener builds a representation in their mind, pictures, sounds, etc., of what we're saying in order to make sense of it. Yeah. As we tell stories, the person is creating this imagery in their mind. Okay. Each word almost will take them on a path or a different path, which they can choose to enter or reject. Okay. And once on a path, it will heavily influence what comes after, which is why when we think about those fluffy clouds, that's why the first impression, that's why the initial opening is so key. And some paths are dead ends. Okay, and if you're in a dead-end path, it's really advisable to go back to the start in order to recover the conversation. I would say almost 95% of conversations are dead ends, and people don't realize, and there's so much time wasted in a dead end. So I'm going to quickly show you how the paths relate to the dynamics. And the dynamics we went through, I think it was last week, it may have been the week before, but it's a really key concept. So on the left, the first path, we've got the authority path, which is, parent, child, teacher, student. So it's really the authority path, which pretty much most of the public are in with their government. It's just do as you're told. If you just say to someone, oh, just follow the rules, that's what you're asking them to do. Okay, so this tends to be a path where you have a ruler and a ruled. Yeah, the ruler will have more power than the ruled. So there's always an imbalance. There's not a cooperation. There's not an equal footing. And this just leads to people doing as they're told and following the rules. And if people get habitually in this pattern, then they would just follow the rules. The one word of caution is that I have at times, when we talked about that stretch zone, someone will, literally the other day, someone said to me, oh, just follow the rules and do as you're told. And I said, okay, so do you advocate, segregating people by color or race? Do you advocate, chemical castration for men, etc.? She's like, well, yeah, because that's what they did in the 60s. Yeah, and that's what they probably still do in some countries. And then she blocked me and whatever, because she couldn't answer the question because it's so challenging. She just wants me to follow the rules when well, surely we have to morally judge each rule. That makes sense. And that's a really key point. But this is one thing that I think underpins so many of the problems, but you have to be gentle in letting them, leading them to the fact that it's not just about following rules. So really take that lily pad approach, very gentle. So the second path is the combative path. And this is really belittling the other person. Oh, you're an idiot, etc. And this is where you get this abuse that goes on. People will come up to you in the park calling you all sorts of names because they're combative. They're trying to drag you down because for a number of reasons. But if what you're saying is true, it has huge implications for them. If you're in a combative dynamic, all you're going to do is play objection tennis. Okay, you're just going to bat facts back and forwards. They're not going to listen to you. If you're in that frame, nothing works. I've tried staying in that frame and communicate with people just as a test, and I couldn't do it. It was never successful. It didn't matter how solid my argument was, didn't matter how solid the start. I literally went to extreme lengths to make it perfect, but they still didn't listen. So it's my opinion that if you're in that dynamic, it doesn't really matter how good your argument is. The next one is the competitive path. And this is a friendlier form of the combative, but it's really, I am better than thou, and you're going to play objection tennis again. So both these middle ones are dead ends. The first one you can get people to do as they're told, but really that's not ethical because there's no balance of power. It's just one person controlling another, which has got us into this problem in the first place. The middle two is going to get you to objection tennis, which are dead ends. And the third one is really establishing we are on the same team. Once that's established, then you will have a conversation that's really friendly. I've had people screaming at me and 10 minutes later, we're having a normal conversation. Okay, I've had people online call me all sorts of names, just honored their experience, said a few things, separated them from the idea, and then we were having a normal conversation. That leads us to solutions. And that's the thing about the paths. If you don't start in the right path, it really doesn't matter what happens after. It might be a dead end. Okay, but really what we're introducing here is this concept of conversational paths. So if we look at some examples of opening statements, and let's look at one and let's see if we spot which dynamic we're in here, which path we have gone down. Okay, so we've got Jane and Joe. So Jane is Joe's brother, and Jane screams, "Why are you wearing a mask? Don't be stupid." Okay, now what we know about conversation, what is Joe's response? Is it going to be warm and heartly, or is it going to be slightly something else? Oh, you're one of those conspiracy theorists, I'm concerned, etc., etc. So what is the dynamic? Which dynamic is it? It's obviously the combative. It's trying to bring someone down from what they're doing. Okay, this, I don't think it's possible to work. I really don't. Okay. Okay, so another example. Jane and Joe again. Lockdown have cost lives. Lockdown saved lives. They had to flatten the curve. Well, how long is the curve? Okay, what one's this in? Okay, which dynamic is this? It's competitive. Okay, my argument's better than yours. There's not abuse in a competitive argument like there is in combative, but it's still, my argument's strong and yours isn't. You'll generally find those people that have worked in certain jobs will learn that they can't be combative to people, so they will just take the competitive one. But it's still oppositional. You still won't get, you're still going to a dead end, basically. We've all had this experience. You say 5 statements, 4 of them are 100% solid. One of them's got a tiny bit of wiggle room. Where do they focus? The wiggle room, because they're in opposition to you. So I think first really is just connect authentically. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's so important. It's really honor the other person first as a human being, and then you'll see a difference. So really, this is just a typical example, and obviously it goes faster than it would in real life. Hi, Joe. Hi, Jane. How is Felix? Felix is the cat. Yeah, he is well. He's roaming about. What do you think's going on? I don't know. It's all a bit crazy. Well, I was reading this article, XXX, you could explain a point. It's like, really? Are you sure that's correct? Yeah, I checked the sources, and isn't it incredible? This is, or there certainly was, much more of a cooperative frame. You see, it's very open. The tone of voice I was getting across was very gentle. And in this situation, Jane will see Joe in a completely different light, and it will happen the same way in reverse. So really, in summary, is that how we imagine the conversation will often be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we change how we look at the world that we look at will change. If we change how we look at the conversation we look at will change. You know, when we tell the story of Rachel in the park, anyone that's heard that story will realize that during the course of that story to the end, how we see it changes. First impression is so important. I mean, I really want to get that across. If you don't get into the right dynamic, it really is a lost cause. Yeah, and it's really thinking about how to get into the right dynamic. Each word will take them on a path, a journey, which they can choose to enter or reject. Once on a path, it will be heavily influenced what comes after. Most of the paths that are created by the media are paths that go down dead ends, or they're paths that go down whatever the narrative wants to happen. This is where awareness is very key. And when you understand what they did with Joe Rogan, you can see that there's a narrative running there. Some paths are dead ends. You need to go back to the initial frame in order to recover the conversation. Go back to the humanity level, connect with the person, and you'll see the whole energy shift. So really think of the anticipated response to statements and questions. It doesn't take long to just think, right, if I ask this question, what's going to happen? But what happens so often is we get so lost in thought that we're not aware of the sort of stimulus and response. But when we practice that, it doesn't take long to work out. Some questions just really don't get you down a good path, and other questions will. And then you'll just learn automatically, unconsciously, on what questions to ask and which ones are not. You'll start developing a good set of stories to share, very empowering, very positive stories. They really are very powerful. So for videos and information, there's now a new site. So we spent a lot of time in the week. The old site had literally ground to a halt, which is really, you know, it's good in some ways, you know, victim of their own success and all. So, and soon we're going to have help improving the user experience. So we just literally got some emails from people that are going to help us make it much easier to use the site. So it's reachingpeople.net, info@reachingpeople.net. What really we want to do is we want to keep the content completely open source. Okay, so literally put it up there, and then people can start building all sorts of documentaries and everything from that. Zoom presentations and the course are free. You know, if you have benefit and you want to support, then you can do so at the website.